what does it mean to be British or American or, say, Nigerian or Afghani? As discourse around the world takes on a more nationalistic tone, weaponizing us and them is an easy way to score political points. Here's a recent example. Rishi Sunak posted this on social media. It says, "Happy Yorkshire Day, proud to call it home and even prouder to represent its people." By all accounts, a pretty innocuous public service announcement, but it sparked heated debate about identity. A known far-right activist wrote, "This is England, it isn't your home." Somehow, to some people, the English-born former Prime Minister still isn't British enough. Demonising otherness is a common political tool. It's not new, but it is taking on a very visible face at the moment. Think about the anti-immigration protests outside asylum hotels in the UK and President Trump's immigration raids and deportations in the US. So, on Counterpoints, we'll ask, how do we define and determine national identity? Is multiculturalism dead? And is nationalism negatively impacting immigration? Joining us to debate the politics surrounding national identity is Bhaskar Sunkara, founding editor of The Jacobin, a magazine that describes itself as the leading voice for the American left. Andrew Allison is here with us, the head of campaigns at Popular Conservatism, a right-leaning faction within the UK Conservative Party. And rounding out our panel, Dr. Omid Shams, a UK-based human rights lawyer and writer. Gentlemen, welcome to Counterpoints and thank you for your time. On social media and across social discourse platforms such as Substack, we're hearing and reading perhaps a lot more about nativism, the policy of protecting the interests of native-born people, as it's described. For example, in the US, we see it in discussions around what is being termed heritage Americans, people who say they're real Americans because they can trace their lineage back to the original settlers. In both cases, there's a criticism that there's a presumption that the further back your generations go, the more worthy you are to be a member of your nation. So let's start, Andrew, let's start with you in the middle of our panel there. How do we and how should we determine national identity? Is it more than just the passport you get to carry?
Well, it's certainly more than the passport that you get to carry. We've tried to define Britishness in the UK for a long time, and it's not an easy thing. But I think most people understand that it needs to do with the rule of law, a sense of fair play. To give two examples, and there are many people who have come to the UK from other countries and other cultures who have assimilated perfectly well and are very much British and regard themselves as British. I think some of the problems that we've been having of late are those people who have come to the UK and have perhaps used the UK as a flag of convenience because they want a British passport eventually, or they certainly want to reside in Britain at the moment and work here, but don't necessarily subscribe to British values and British culture.
Bhaskar, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to have a society in which we appreciate that, of course, nation states exist, and it's okay for people to be proud of where they're from. But we need ultimately a civic nationalism that's rooted in universal values. This, I think, is in the best tradition of the Enlightenment, the ideas of equality before the law, democracy, secularism, the idea that people are more than their inherited identities. I think these bind us together as citizens in the West, and that's more important than where we're from. And sometimes these efforts to force kind of assimilation from above on people just tend to backfire and make them recoil even deeper into their identity and their communities. And I think in the United States, for example, we've done quite well, at least until recent months, in assimilating people and making them feel like they're fully American. You know, my parents came to the U.S. just 1 year before I was born. I consider myself an unhyphenated American, even though I'm proud of my culture and identity and rituals and certainly the food. I think, the food in my household is better than the average American household, I think. But I never felt like I was part of an alien culture. And I think that should be really the goal. This sort of American integration should really be the goal of how European societies relate to mass immigration as well.
Omid, what do you think? Is it a way that stitches together a very robust community, this sense that you're more than the nation that you're from, or is it a problem? Is it a positive? Is it a negative?
I believe it depends on how we look at the sense of identity and the belonging, especially the national identity. If we look at it from, for example, Churchill's viewpoint, which is not necessarily left, I might not agree with him in so many things, but he, when he reacts to Aliens Act, for example, in 1905, he describes something as the old tolerant and generous idea of free entry and asylum seeker as a part of this sense of identity of the British people. So I believe that the sense of identity is something negotiated. It's not something rigid. It creates an opportunity of dialogue between the cultures that reside next to each other. I believe that as far as it depends on the situation that people will be in charge of creating that sense of identity, as long as the government is not trying to interfere and to impose it on either side of this kind of unbalanced discussion that we see these days, either in favor of imposing a very solid definition of national identity, or to kind of artificially promoting certain minority cultures without those communities actually want the government to do that, then we will have a dynamic that will thrive. And in that sense, yes, I think the national identity is a positive.
Andrew, do you think that, to what Omid has been saying there, that is it a case that governments are prescribing an identity of us or them on certain members of society as a political tool?
I don't think that's particularly the case in the UK. No, I don't think that's happening. I do think that some people in British politics like to get outraged for those people of minorities, when those people are just quite happy to defend themselves and get on with their own lives. I think that most certainly does happen. And of course, we've benefited from people from different cultures coming into the UK. I mean, the most obvious example is food, I suppose. That if you go to London now, I mean, you can get any cuisine in the world made by people who originate from those particular parts of the world. So I mean that's all well and good. I think as long as the people who do come here also basically subscribe to British values, and then I think everything's going to be fine after that. As I said in my original sort of first bit, that when I spoke, the problem is when those people do not really believe in British values and maybe want to live in a ghetto of some sort. They don't learn the English language and they're very separate from the rest of society. That's where we have a problem.
Bhaskar, what do you think? I mean, whether it's British values, American values, Australian values, is this idea that certain cultures that come need to prescribe to the values of the country they've arrived into, this idea of nativism, is it just demonizing the other dressed up in a more academic sense?
I think there are certain broad values that immigrants need to subscribe to, broad values. So by that, I mean values like equality before the law, values like you're now a citizen, or you're aiming to become a citizen of, in the US case, a republic, or at the very least, a democracy. Values that say that regardless of how you act in your own home and in your own private beliefs, that the civil sphere is secular and so on. Of course, those broad-based values are perfectly reasonable. But at the same time, I'm very wary of efforts to impose a sort of republicanism from above, because I think they tend to backfire. So, for example, in France, they'll tell you you can't wear a hijab in public school, you can't wear a yarmulke in public schools. And what does this make you feel? This makes you feel like you're different than your fellow classmates, that you have something to be afraid of or ashamed of. And if anything, it just makes you recoil even further into being ostracized into a separate community. Whereas in the US, I think we have a much more relaxed approach to our version of republicanism that has actually yielded a much more integrated and assimilated culture. And I think it is a little bit different than even things that I encounter sometimes in the UK, which is a sort of, at times, almost state-sponsored multiculturalism that says that there's organic community leaders that the state should be talking to and actually have the pulse on what, let's say, Pakistani interests are in the UK and so on. You know, I can tell you exactly what Pakistani interests are in the UK. And it's not because I'm South Asian. It's because that I know people. I know that people want a good job. They want a safe streets for their families. We all basically want the same things. And I think this narrative of kind of community leaders and organic communities, I think tends to go a little bit too far, and I think naturally creates some backlash from a native-born population that says, you know, who are our community leaders? Should I start identifying as a white Briton if someone else gets to identify, you know, with behind their own community? And we end up creating societies that are much, much more divided instead of seeing the commonality and the universal threads that bind together all of us in this common endeavor of humanity.
I can see you
May I
laughing
just interject there, just very briefly?
Yeah, please.
May I just interject very briefly? No, it's the whole community leaders thing. Yeah, this has always been a big thing in the UK. And I think we realise that those people are not really community leaders. They're just people who are self-appointed. And you know what it's like. We all work in the media. What sort of title shall we give you? Well, I'll just call me a community leader, and then that's how it goes on.
Is it then prescribing a bit of what Bhaskar was saying, this that the communities themselves are generating their own sense of otherness?
Yes, in certain communities, but then again, it depends on what it is. I mean, we've had a lot of problems with people from a certain part of Pakistan, originate from a certain part of Pakistan, with various grooming gangs, rape gangs in the UK. This is big news at the moment. But at the same time, we've got people who've come from India, where there hasn't really been a problem. People come from the Caribbean, where there hasn't been a problem. And in general, from Pakistan, it hasn't been a problem. It's just been from a certain part of Pakistan with a certain tradition. So yeah, that's the way that it is.
Do you think that, Andrew, if I could just ask you, and then Omid, I'm going to bring you in on this as well. Andrew, just to further to that, do you think that the idea of politics, of media defining an us and a them is a way to scapegoat some of the problems onto a particular section of a community?
Well, it can be, and I wouldn't just blame the media for that. I would blame politicians for that because they really do enjoy doing that. And when we had some writing issues a year ago, beginning of August last year, Keir Starmer was very keen to blame the far right. It really had very little to do with the far right. Yeah, of course, there's always a far right element involved. But the majority of people who were actually demonstrating and being very vocal on the streets were anything but. They were just concerned families.
Omid, a lot of people, when they are critical of someone's claiming a national identity that they think that they don't have a right to, there seems to be always an undertone of people being afraid of demographic change. People say England doesn't look like it used to, America doesn't look like America anymore. You know, this person doesn't look like a real Australian. Why are people so afraid, do you think, Omid, of demographic change?
Well, I don't believe that this is necessarily what people are mainly afraid of. I believe that there are, first of all, if I may, I just add something to the previous part of the discussion, which is that I agree with both Andrew and Bhaskar that what we see, first of all, there are some core values. Those core values should be there. Those core values are actually the reason that countries like United States or United Kingdom, they are attractive to people who are immigrating there or those asylum seekers who come in here. Those values, however, are diversity, the rule of law, the tolerance, and the secular democracy. It's very important that this discussion that we are having will be free and frequent, so all of these issues will be heard from different perspectives and without fear of being labeled as far right or far left, being labeled as Islamophobic or, I don't know, Muslim extremists or things like that. This will contribute to the better understanding of what are the actual problems. I don't believe that people are necessarily afraid of demographic change. I believe that at some points they feel that some parts of their culture are being diminished, or some parts of these diverse culture are being excluded. Let me bring an example from a person who's coming from a supposed to be a Muslim society. When I walk with my daughter and see that Ramadan is being celebrated, my daughter will ask me immediately why Nowruz is not celebrated here. So this is the situation that my daughter will feel that her culture is being excluded. So I believe that these kind of issues should be trusted to the people to promote their culture, to talk about their culture, and to understand. And at the same time, there are some core values. Those core values should be always protected. And if those values are protected, for example, the fundamental value of Europe, which is the Enlightenment, encourages challenging any idea, questioning them, questioning religion, questioning extremism, questioning all kind of ideas from the far left or far right. If that is possible, people can deal with it. People in a constructive construction will eventually find a common ground where they will feel that they belong to a thriving culture, which might not look like the past, but is something that each of them will share some parts of sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm. Bhaskar, do you think people are afraid of demographic change?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's reasonable, to be honest, that people are anxious about rapid demographic change. When the world shifts quickly, people naturally worry about losing their place in it. So I think we should come from the starting point of not demonizing people or saying that they're inherently bigots, but rather working through their concerns. And I think the goal really is turning that fear that people have into not hostility, but sort of building a society in which no one's security depends on what their neighbors are, the material security. So, just as we set kind of speed limits on a highway to make sure that people can get from one place to another safely and orderly, I think it makes sense to assure people that actually there is a plan around immigration, that it is orderly, but that ultimately we're building a society that's going to be better for everyone, a society in which people have good jobs and housing and healthcare, where they don't fear newcomers, but see them as partners in this effort. I think this is the really sad thing. When I go around to a place like Germany and you talk to older pensioners, and they're absolutely outraged and they're afraid of new waves of immigration, when in fact, this is the migrant workers that are working 40, 50 hours a week that are helping sustain the German welfare state that now the pensioners dependent on. So I think the key thing is really to start talking to people where they are, but ultimately to reject the kind of zero-sum vision of the world in which we're all fighting each other for a finite pie, but rather show the way in which immigration can actually bolster strong social rights. And then ultimately, you'd rather be in a more diverse society in which there is more material security and there is still a welfare state than in a more homogenous society in which there's social decay and crime and all these other maladies.
It sounds like a perfect world, and I'm from Australia, and as a nation, we prided ourselves on the success of our multiculturalism. We flew the flag for being the cultural melting pot, and it helped shape our population. But if I'm honest, it doesn't feel like that anymore. Political and cultural discourse has turned, like it has in many countries, towards a more race or lineage-based definition of being a true Australian, for example. Omid, let me ask you, is multiculturalism dead? Countries don't seem to be proud of multiculturalism the way that they used to be.
Well, in a sense, yes, I would say that what we used to see as multiculturalism as a positive value is now kind of dead, because now people are worried of so many very realistic issues, including the job shortage, including the opportunity, including overwhelming healthcare system. These are real problems. This has to be addressed. But I believe that a part of what people are seeing as the cause of these problems are mainly kind of fabricated by hot debates on media, which most of the time are not, necessarily based on credible data. Sometimes they are just some sort of an image of the situation, which is excluding some parts of the problem, which is a broken governance, which is a kind of a free ticket to some of the major corporations that are now offshoring jobs and opportunities to other countries. So in many situations, people will see what is in front of them, that is the change of demography, and they'll say that, okay, these people are coming with different culture, overwhelming our public services. But at the same time, there are lots of jobs going offshores. There's lots of opportunities going offshores, and those are not necessarily visible to the people. So yes, multiculturalism in some ways going to be disappeared, but I believe that this eventually turn around, and we will see some sort of a balanced, diverse community, especially if we look at the problem from the main cause of the problem, and to address it, and to talk to people about the real issues that is at stake.
Andrew, what do you think? Is multiculturalism dead in our current sense?
Well, yeah, and I think it most certainly should be, in the sense of this sort of forced multiculturalism that we've certainly had in the UK. I mean, we had a debate, debate that's been going on the last couple of weeks here in the UK. To do with British flags, and whether it's okay to actually fly the Union Jack or fly the flag of St. George, and some councils have been ripping down flags because they're saying on health and safety grounds they're not put up safely. But this sort of whole debate has been going on, and there is nothing wrong with having pride in your country. And flags, for example, are exclusive. They're not meant to be inclusive. They're there to say that I am part of this particular club. If I go to Lord's, for example, and watch England play Australia, we're going to be flying the flag of St. George, and Australians in the crowd are going to be flying the Australian flag. And you're not flying the Australian flag to say, let's, all unite, cricket supporters of the world unite. It's there to say that I am proud of Australia. I am an Australian. So, multicultural in that sense, multiculturalism rather in that sense, yeah. I mean, it's been, in many ways, it has tried to be forced on our country, and of course, the sheer number of immigrants that are coming across into the UK is difficult for the whole infrastructure of the country to actually cope with.
We're going to get specifically onto immigration in our final segment as well, so we'll dive into that a little bit more deeper shortly. Bhaskar, what do you think? Is multiculturalism dead? If it is, as our guests have said, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't think multiculturalism is dead. I think there's these sorts of ebbs and flows, but I would just repeat that the kind of multiculturalism that you see in places like the UK, where the state sort of tries to manage difference by elevating community leaders and almost locking people into fixed identity, I think that's something that's not a good thing. I think it often empowers the most conservative voices in immigrant communities, and I think it fragments solidarity between different groups of people. So in the US, for all its problems, the older idea of a melting pot, I think in many ways was healthier, because it pointed towards a shared civic identity that was being constructed. And I think it's obviously easier for historical reasons for that to exist in the U.S. But I think broadly everywhere in the West, we need to return to that spirit, not in a aggressively assimilationist way, because like I said, I think that backfires, and or that seeks to kind of erases people's culture, but in a universalist way that unites people on common rights, common struggles, and common institutions. So I kind of want to go beyond the idea that we either have to accept that there's going to be these narrow cultural boxes, or we have to, on the other hand, say that there shouldn't be immigration and immigration's a bad thing. So I go back to this idea of giving people a sense that there's a plan, that there's an order, that in fact managed immigration is going to be a good thing, not just because the food's going to get better or because of diversity for the sake of diversity, but because it's part of creating a good society.
Omid, what about the idea of nationalism versus multiculturalism? I mean, we heard Andrew, talking about this sort of debate going on around whether or not it's okay to fly the flag, the English flag. Can you have both? Can you have nationalism and multiculturalism?
Absolutely. I believe that nationalism is not at all and the opposite of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is based on the tolerance and diversity, which are in so many countries parts of the foundational values of those societies. So nationalism, if we look at the nationalism, if we look at the concept of civic nationalism, where we can understand those core values, and within that, we will accept that there are certain issues that is not just negotiable. That is the part of the how can I put it? The actual flavor of that culture. What made that culture unique? So you cannot just exclude that. You cannot just make it disappear, or you cannot label people who are proud of those values, those unique flavors, as far right or extremist. You should understand that this multiculturalism is now, for example, changing, and it has nothing to do with any type of nationalism. You have digital nomads right now are going to Vietnam or other countries. They are being integrated in those parties. They are not being looked at a threat to the nationalism in those countries, in those societies. So we have to look at what is the actual threat that some of the nationalists would see when they are kind of critical of multiculturalism. I don't believe that multiculturalism is necessarily undermining nationalism if that nationalism is not trying to own the concept of defining what, for example, being a British or being Iranian, but being an Indian means. So if it is an inclusive concept, yes, I think they can coexist.
What's your take on that, Andrew? Can they coexist, or is one opposed to the other?
Well, as has already been said, forced migration doesn't work. Managed migration most certainly does work. I think that has been proved around the country. But when David Cameron was British Prime Minister, he said that he would bring migration down to the tens of thousands. And I know we're moving on to migration a little later on, but we're now still into the hundreds of thousands of people coming in. I think it goes back to some of the points that I've made earlier in this debate, in that if people come across here, they have their own identities, and that is absolutely fine. They bring with them a different culture, and that's absolutely fine. But if they want to become British citizens, and indeed do become British citizens, then there certainly should be a certain amount of national pride in being British. And if you don't really have that, if you're not really proud of Britain, if it's just convenient for you to be in Britain because you're going to have a better standard of living, then I don't think that's very good for the country at all.
It's no surprise then that as politics swings towards nationalism and the public discourse focuses on nativism, immigration is put under an even harsher spotlight. We've seen anti-immigration protests outside asylum hotels in the UK and in the US, the termination of temporary protection for many migrants, as well as an increase in asylum denials. Bhaskar, is nationalism negatively impacting immigration policy? Is our sense, this sense that we're getting of nationalism and nativism, is it having too much of an impact on the way governments manage immigration? Or is it perhaps overdue for a rebalance?
So I would draw a strong distinction between the two things you mentioned there, nationalism and nativism. I think there's a certain type of civic nationalism that's perfectly fine. My parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago, so when I watch cricket, I have the pleasure of rooting not for a nation state. I root for the Windies, but I think it's perfectly reasonable if you're a British flag to wave the Union Jack. I had a debate in the last World Cup. I supported Britain over a certain other team, and members of my family were outraged. And I said, look at the team. It's a team shaped by mass migration. You know, it's a team that is certainly don't look like colonial overlords to me. So, you know, I think the key thing in this debate is really to reframe immigration and migration as something that's normal, that can be managed and can be done in a positive way. I think right now we think so much about migration as a crisis. You know, migration has been part of human life for millennia. Just ask people how many look at the composition of Britain itself. You know, Britain itself was shaped by waves of invasion and mass migration for millennia too. You know, people have always moved around for opportunity, for safety, for all sorts of reasons. I think the challenge is to really manage it fairly and humanely, and not to panic about it. I think that's where, if we go hard against all forms of nationalism and say, if you have any national pride whatsoever, you're a bigot, or you're an extreme right winger, you're only going to allow the far right to monopolize that terrain. So I'm fine with saying that I'm proud of being an American. Now, if someone said to me, say the Pledge of Allegiance right now, say you're proud to be an American, I would probably say, curse them off and say, no, absolutely not. I think that's the tension here. Whereas we don't want these strong dichotomies between saying, you need to assimilate now, you need to be proud and wave the Union Jack. But we do need a society where that's perfectly okay, and that's not a label or a stigma. And I think that's a balancing act that, to be perfectly honest, the U.S. had all sorts of other problems in its history, but I think it got right up until the election of Donald Trump.
Andrew, what do you make of what Bhaskar has been saying there?
I think we've got to introduce a new word into this, and it's patriotism. I think with nationalism, a lot of people think of people who are sort of white supremacists. I'm not saying that they are, but I think a lot of people think of people like that, and it's a sort of a kick the foreigners out type of approach with a certain amount of nationalism. So I avoid that word, and I just think of patriotism. It's just being proud of your country. Be proud to be American, be proud to be Australian, be proud to be British. Take a pride in your country.
What about the idea of whether that pride is having too much of an impact on immigration policy, when we hear, as Bhaskar describes it, that it's being marketed to us as a crisis? Is it a crisis?
I think it's a crisis in the UK. I genuinely do. Immigration numbers are just being way too high. The population of the UK has gone up by over 10 million in the last 20 years. We have a creaking infrastructure here in the UK. People can't get hospital appointments, GP appointments. They can't get their kids into schools. The whole infrastructure is creaking. So yes, it is a problem. What we want, what the vast majority of British people want, is a managed migration policy. Well, I guess we do allow people in. We do if we need a dozen new surgeons in one particular speciality, then of course we're going to go searching around the world to get the best surgeons in that particular speciality. We're not going to cut our nose off to spite our face. But I think it just definitely needs to be managed.
You're in the UK as well, Omid. Is it a crisis? Is immigration a crisis at the moment?
Definitely it is. When people are worried and when this is the top issue in the United Kingdom where the whole society is talking about it. So it is definitely a problem. First of all, let me tell you, I am an Iranian who had to flee the state persecution, coming to the United Kingdom, where I've been given opportunity to fight for the values that I believe in. And I feel at home, right at home in this country because of the values that this country is protecting. So there's nothing wrong with that kind of idea. So I agree with Andrew about it. I prefer the concept of patriotism because it is based on the love that you have for those values, for those opportunities that you get in a society, and it's all about the society. So, but yes, the immigration is a problem here, and at the same time that this is a problem of overwhelming public service, we should also understand that the immigrants are the pillars of some of the key industries and jobs here in the United Kingdom, everywhere else. Here they are contributing most to the healthcare system as well, in terms of the healthcare workers. And in many cases, when we're talking about immigrants, we are talking about immigrants who are paying their way through this healthcare system, and they are contributing to this society and to this industry. But it is not just a concept that will say we will look at it from a sentimental viewpoint and we'll be getting away with all the problems that he's posing. So we have to have a realistic view at the situation. And I agree that the managed immigration is very important. Let me tell you something about the asylum seeker. First of all, there is a misunderstanding about the difference between the illegal immigration and the illegal asylum seeker. Legally speaking, we don't have such a concept as illegal asylum seeker. Asylum seeking is a right, so there's no illegal entry for asylum seeker. But at the same time, when it comes to the asylum seekers, there are a lot of those who are seeking asylum here. But because the government is not working with the local human rights organization that know who is actually at risk in those countries, who can actually help the government to understand how to manage this, how to help, how to fasten this process of dealing with these cases, they live in limbo. They can, most of them who are actually not eligible to live here, they cannot be turned back for so many legal concern that there is there, and they won't be enjoying any rights here. So they will live in a limbo, and that is on the governments. It's not just about looking at the immigration as a good or bad thing. It's about the management. It's about the governments. There are lots of problems that can be easily solved, so this pressure will be reduced.
That's interesting, actually. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask this question to all of you as we wrap up. Bhaskar, I'll start with you. Governments are always, politicians are always looking for what's going to get them the biggest headline. And at the moment, if you talk tough on immigration, you're going to be making headlines. You're going to be getting the attention that these politicians want. Do you think that the issue with immigration is not rooted in reality? It's more rooted in wanting to look like you're talking tough. But really, if you wanted to make societal or economic changes, there are other things politicians could do, but they're harder and it's easier to talk about kicking out migrants.
So you're saying something I broadly agree with. You know, I'm a democratic socialist. I believe in creating bigger, more generous welfare states. I believe in the premise of equality and against this zero-sum thinking that's behind a lot of the anti-immigrant discourse. At the same time, I think we need to listen to what people are saying. And if people are concerned, they're concerned for a reason. I think telling them they're wrong or confused is the route to just leading the far right to be the only group speaking to their grievances. So I do think that there was an issue, even in the United States. There was an issue with people entering the United States through the asylum process, including many people who are just economic migrants. Now, in my mind, that's not the problem. Is that we didn't have a clear liberal immigration system. I think we should have been letting those people into the country, but they should have been let in so that they could work and contribute to society. Instead, one side was saying these people are drains on our economy. Another side was saying we need to take care of these people. They need our charity. Whereas actually, in fact, most immigrants are, in many ways, the best of the people entering a society. These are people who are motivated, highly motivated, who have the planning ability, are willing to take risks, who want to make something better of themselves. And I think the goal of a just immigration policy is how to harness the capabilities of new members of a society without displacing or hurting people who are already here. And just really thinking of a positive sum vision. So to answer your question, I think it is much easier to present these zero sum visions of the world right now. But I don't think it would be particularly hard if politicians really wanted to present a vision in which we all uplift each other and in which we have both global development and internal development of countries that address both many of the reasons why people are forced out of their homes to begin with, but also enable them when they're entering into a new society to help the economy and help those who are already established there.
Omid, I saw you shaking your head as Bhaskar was starting his point there. What's your take on it?
I absolutely agree with Bhaskar on this, because I believe that, first of all, the immigration has to be addressed, and there are some tough decisions to be made. But at the same time, I believe that the majority of the problems are on the side of the government's mismanagement of the problem. There are many things to be done that can make it more efficient. For example, right now, this 5 years, 10 years scheme that we are dealing with in the United Kingdom, there are lots of qualified, very highly skilled immigrants that they've been here. This society invested on them, and because it's a long process, they will, if they find an opportunity, they might just leave to another country where this situation will be eased. So these are the situations that has to be addressed. At the same time, I believe that within the scheme for asylum seeking, the process is lengthy, the process is not sufficient, not efficient. It can be improved by engaging the community, engaging the local organizations who know the situation in those countries where the asylum seekers are coming, engaging the immigrant communities to protect the values of the society, to understand how important it is for their prosperity and for the whole country to protect that sense of belonging, to be actively engaging and protecting that can ease the situation, and it will give people a sense of belonging. It will kind of reduce that concern that we see is rising in society.
Round us out, Andrew. What do you think? Can politicians be more effective if they're focusing on other sections of society, of the economy, or are they focusing on immigration because it's easy to make headlines and get popular support?
Well, immigration is a major issue, as has already been said. So it is a big issue. And the asylum processing system in the UK is a complete and utter mess. We're talking about 18 months to 2 years to process claims. You know, I'd be looking more at 18 days than 18 months. There are people who are genuinely fleeing for their lives, like you have from Iran, and you have to get to a safe country. And there are others who are just economic migrants who I don't blame them for wanting to come to the UK for a better life, but they try to jump the system and come through on the asylum system. But I mean, there are many other problems. I mean, the world's in economic meltdown, just about. Certainly, the UK could be going cap in hand to the IMF for a bailout. We've got all sorts of issues that are going on, and although immigration is high on that list because the British people have asked for many years now to have lower rates of migration, and we haven't got those lower rates of migration, so you understand why people are angry, and those concerns need addressed. And we've also got lots of other concerns in other areas such as the economy.
It's a really interesting discussion and one that is not going anywhere anytime soon. Gentlemen, thank you all for your contribution here on Counterpoints. Bhaskar Sunkara, founding editor of the Jacobin magazine. Andrew Allison, the head of campaigns at Popular Conservatism, and Dr. Omid Shams, a UK-based human rights lawyer and writer. Thank you for your time here on this episode. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Counterpoints. To keep up to date with our latest debates and interviews, be sure to subscribe to Al Arabiya English on YouTube. And of course, you can follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.